Hello, I'm Dr. Katherine Horton. This video is an update on the ongoing and premeditated crimes committed by the intelligence agencies against me. I'm just one out of many, many thousands of victims, but now there are efforts to actually have this investigated and to have this rolled up. For that reason, this video, along with all the others that I've made, is actually crucial evidence. Evidence to be used in court in future, and maybe even in trials against war crimes and crimes against humanity, which is what these crimes are. For this reason, I'm going to make the entire statement under oath. I intend to make all of my videos under oath, but sometimes I forget. So, but in any case, in every single video, I do hold myself to the standard that I say the truth to the best of my knowledge. So even in the videos that I haven't actually done the oath, you can also rely on them that I intend to say the truth. There's no reason why sometimes there's no oath in the beginning. It's just me sometimes forgetting and just shooting a video, as I speak. But here it is now. This is using the witness affirmation according to the Oath Act 1978, which is still legally binding in the UK. And I use this oath because it was in the UK that I had my last court case, and it's in the UK that my targeting started, and British intelligence is heavily, heavily involved. So I do solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So this is an update on what happened over Christmas. I have received a lot of emails, and I'm so grateful for that. Really very kind emails. People asking me how I am because I haven't given an update, and I am extremely grateful. And I just would like to thank you for that publicly, so that other victims who haven't come forward yet know that when you go online, it's not just abuse that you receive. You actually receive an awful lot of support. So I would urge all victims, just take the courage and come forward, because you'll realize that there are a lot of people who go through the same thing, and these people have incredible kindness for you, and it actually helps a lot getting those emails when you're hit particularly hard. So thank you for all those messages. I had an extremely hard time over Christmas. I was attacked extremely. When I traveled to Germany. Since then, I've spoken to Martin Bott, whose brother Markus Bott has been murdered by the BND in 2009, I think on the 11th of July 2009. It says on his website, he's repeated that statement over and over. I do, as far as I can ascertain, that's the truth. His website has been around for a long time. So according to Martin Bott, the attacks on him are particularly severe in Germany. And I can certainly, I have been extremely, extremely viciously hit in the UK, in Italy, in the Netherlands, here in Switzerland, of course, in my home. But what I have gone through now in Germany was just an extra level. It's very hard for me to ascertain if this is just a natural course of the human experimentation program. But what I've been put through in Germany was insane. So I have been shot at with microwave weapons when I flew to my parents in Germany. I intended to spend Christmas with them. And a lot of victims actually share that, that when you're on an airplane, you get microwave, you get hit with these electromagnetic weapons, and it's extremely painful, it's extremely disconcerting, and worst of all, you cannot move out of the beam because you're strapped into your seat and you have to sit quietly, on the airplane. And that is precisely the reason why they do it. Once I figured out how they did it, that was from the angle and the point where I felt the pain. It was from a seat behind me, and that was when I emailed the BND, the German intelligence agency, in May 2016, and I requested that they cease and desist. And all sorts of spectacles started happening, but 2 or 3 days later, I took a flight to Spain, and on the flight, I was microwaved demonstratively, extremely painfully, where the back of my head was microwaved, and simultaneously the young chap who sat behind me said out loud, "Pain on the back of the head." And then I turned around and he just quickly put something away. So from that incident, it could be in principle that the emitter was placed in the locker above me, I have no idea. I also do not know if these lockers have a solid base of aluminium, or if they're just hard-cased plastic. This is relevant in as far as microwaves do not penetrate aluminium, microwave beams, but they do penetrate plastic. So if it's just hard-cased plastic on the airplane, then you can place emitters just in the bags above people's heads and assault them from there. If it's not like that, then you can still, I think, use these handheld emitters. And I do think that these emitters are handheld. I think they are. I have seen and I've experienced things that make me believe that they're in handbags and rucksacks, and they can also be, they can shine these things onto you by hand, and you will experience pain. So this is my experience from having been shot at the first time demonstratively on a plane. It was immediately 2 or 3 days after requesting from the BND to cease and desist. And most demonstratively, they did not cease and desist. They have just stepped it up even harder. And it's pretty much what happened here. So I have, in a panic before Christmas, approached the German embassy, which is staffed by BND staff traditionally. All embassies are. And I have been turned down. I have been ignored. This was up after the what's it called? The Sicherheitsbeauftragte, so the person in charge of security and safety at the embassy, confirmed to me that most likely I'm being shot at by the BND with microwave weapons. I told him my assessment, and he said, "You're probably right." It's and then the embassy blocked. So I'm still trying to work with the embassy, but I'm saying this because what happened then is that as I was begging to get through to the embassy, at home I had received shots into my eye, brutal shots to the forehead, and at night I was microwaved so insanely that the next day I woke up damaged. And specifically, the actual entire irradiation program at night has been focused on the right-hand side of my skull and the right-hand side of my face, accessing the right hemisphere of my brain, which is in charge of the left side of my body, and also my left hand. And this is relevant in as far as I have been brutally microwaved in the UK in October, at the end of October, is attending the court case of Dr. Stephen Frost versus MOD. That is what I wanted to report to the Greater Manchester Police at Ashton-under-Lyne. And the video, the intimidation theatre that resulted, is online. You can see that on YouTube. That's called MI5. I think I called it MI5, bullshit, or MI5 intimidation theatre, because that's essentially what it is. I was not allowed to report this, and bit by bit I find out why. It's because it is part of a brain mapping program. They use powerful, but extremely powerful microwave beams that punch through your wall. The house wall. This is not actually very difficult. I can upload the link to actually a research paper that demonstrates that most building materials are essentially transparent to microwaves, certainly to the microwaves that are used in these sorts of assaults. And essentially, the microwaving to the right hand side of my skull, the right hemisphere of my brain, in the UK, goes hand in hand with the continued extreme microwaving of the right hemisphere of my brain here in Switzerland. And when I fled to the embassy because of that, and I begged them to assist me, they refused. So the program continued, and what happened very quickly is that I woke up and I had pins and needles in my my left hand. This is my left hand. And that's because if you damage the right hand hemisphere of your brain, the damage will be, felt in the left side of your body. And in my case, they specifically targeted my left hand. Now, this is after they have shot at my joints. They've muscle pulsed all the muscles in my body over a period of a year. This entire program started overtly in Germany. The muscle twitches started after an MRI. So imagine, I go and have an MRI forced on me by a headache that's induced on the back of my head in Germany. That's the history, the background history. Then immediately, the day on the day of the MRI, I start having muscle twitches. So it seems to be the case that I was injected with something at the MRI that then allowed them to start mapping out the muscles and how they connect up to the brain. And typically the contrast agent that's injected into you at an MRI crosses the brain-blood barrier. And that means that whatever's injected into you passes into the brain. And I suspect that they use the injection at the MRI to pass something into my brain that has the same properties, or has been added to the contrast agent. But this started in Munich zone, essentially, next to Pullach, where the BND is headquartered. I had a year of muscle pulsing. Every single muscle in my body has been twitched like half a dozen of times, one after the other. And after this program, they started irradiating my joints. They damaged my hip specifically. They damaged my knee specifically. The damage to the hip and knee was always done such that it appeared to be in retaliation for something, and I think they do use it for retaliation, but the main program is the actual brain mapping program, and for that they also want to figure out how pain in the joints maps to your brain and so on. And after that I had my thyroid irradiated over weeks and weeks and weeks. I had painful pencil beams shot into my body everywhere. I woke up with dozens of bruises on my legs, and I can also post the images, although they show me half naked, so I am very reluctant. But what I have essentially discovered is that I woke up and I had literally sometimes a dozen bruises the size of a pound coin, of a euro coin. And the bruising is, I believe, as a result of the capillaries bursting under the microwave irradiation, and therefore the size of the bruise shows you the size of the focused beam or collimated beam. It's being shot into your body, and essentially they use these microwave beams to map out your muscles, how your muscles map with the controls in your brain. And after that program, they started microwaving my eyes. I also woke up and I discovered that I had it looked like a scratch on my eye, which actually I think was a very fine scar. So I believe that at that point, and that was after I went public on the Richie Allen show. So, the program just continues inexorably, and everybody who can help you refuses to do so. The German ambassador refuses, the police refuses. The police in Switzerland has been playing stupid for essentially over a year. And the criminal police has refused to help. And meanwhile, what is being done to the victims is absolutely horrific. So the brain map, oh, by the way, a very important part of the brain mapping was also the brain mapping and remote steering of my heartbeat. And they have done the brain mapping for that and demonstrated that they can do that. When I was attending the hearing of Dr. Stephen Frost versus MOD, I was sitting in a hearing and they artificially ramped up my heartbeat. I couldn't do anything about it, and I was just sitting perfectly calmly listening to the court hearing, and I had been sitting stationary for an hour, and suddenly they ramped up my heartbeat to the point that I could hear my pulse, and it was as if I'd just been running a race. And then they just stopped it. It ramped back down, and exactly 20 minutes later, they repeated the exercise. So they demonstrated that they can remote control my heart. What they have done since then, and prolifically over Christmas, is essentially show me that they can cause extreme discomfort by steering my heart. You suddenly start having extreme aches in your heart region. I still have to figure out if that's because they actually interfere with my heart, or if they shoot extremely intense microwave beams onto my heart, because they have been doing that as well. There was one instance, for example, in my bedroom in Switzerland, where they actually used a microwave beam. I was turned towards the house of a neighbor from which some of these emissions are coming from. And essentially what they did is that they muscle pulsed me, so the muscles in my chest above my heart started contracting, not quite straight above my heart, but slightly to the side. And suddenly they made the muscles contract in the pattern of a heartbeat. So you have this boom, 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 boom contraction of your muscles. It wasn't my heart, it was actually the muscles. And when I felt that, you instinctively put your hand on it, and I could feel the microwave beam shooting through my hand. So these beams, they make your muscles contract, but in the joints, the energy gets absorbed, and the nerves you have on the joints trigger. That's why you feel this intense, or I certainly feel intense joint ache when I reach into a microwave beam. So at that instant, that was an example of how they pretended to steer my heart by just making my muscles contract, by sending intense electromagnetic pulses to it that I could then also feel. But there's also certainly ways where they can control my heartbeat remotely. And when I was attending the court hearing, I couldn't feel a direct shot onto my heart. There's always the chance that they actually are in a room next to me or behind me, because I was sitting behind a wall and they actually irradiated me through the wall. That's possible. Otherwise, I was sitting next to a big window. But the issue is that if they've read out your brain print and your essentially the signals that your nervous system sends, then the signals for your heartbeat are essentially continuous. That's a baseline. So they should read that out first if they map your brain. And essentially, I would like to publicly state that they have now read essentially my heartbeat, and as far as I can tell, they do remote control it at will. So should I die from a heart attack, please, I ask you not to be fooled and to just take the person to be guilty, whoever's the head of the intelligence agency of the country I died in. It's that simple. This sort of heart torture that's also reported by many victims has been done to me over Christmas, quite intensely. This is not something that they do regularly here in Switzerland, but in Germany, the psychopathology, the sadism, especially over Christmas, especially when you want to be with your family, that's when they ramped it up. So my journey to Switzerland, as I said, I rambled and I told you all the other things that happened that are the background story. But imagine, I now take a plane to be with my family over Christmas. I get assaulted on the plane. I have extreme pain and electroshocks, essentially pulses to my skull. There it was mostly the top of my skull, so it could have been from several seats back, or from maybe even the overhead lockers if they're not actually solid aluminium at the bottom. And that's how I flew home. Then I was picked up from the airport by my father, and throughout the entire car journey from the airport to my parental home, the back of my head was microwaved extremely painfully from the cars driving behind us. And then also there were instances where I was, the car that was behind me overtook us, and then when it was in front of me, my face was being microwaved. So it's instances like that where you'd realize it's not all satellites. Sure, they can be using satellites, but they also use a lot of kit on the ground. And this is how I arrived at home. At home, I was microwaved from the neighbors' homes, from the homes that I suspect are involved. And then also the next day, I was alone in the home, as my parents were still working that day. And essentially, I woke up in the morning. They induced a headache, but it was not like a normal headache, because it feels like your entire brain is being essentially burnt up from the inside. This is something I have never ever felt before in my life. As like probably everybody, occasionally I had migraines throughout my life, but very rarely. I do not suffer regularly from migraines. I did have headaches in the past. I have been alive for many, many years, and this is not something I've ever felt before. Essentially, my entire brain felt like it was being burnt up from the inside. And essentially, they started the pain. It was literally like a switch being flicked. They just turned it on. I think there are many ways to cause this, but I will just tell you the symptoms. So as soon as it was switched on, so normal headaches just start gradually, and then you think, oh, maybe I have a headache, maybe I don't. But this was literally just a switch. They turned it on. The headache got worse and worse and worse and worse. I was trying to cope. I was trying to just go about the business, trying my business, trying to ignore it. But within an hour, it was so intense. I crawled down into the cellar, wondering if it's maybe a directed beam. And it was so intense, I literally just collapsed on the floor. I literally just collapsed on the floor from pain. And I was just there in the cellar, just waiting for it to go. And in the end, the pain was so intense that I felt that I was going to be sick. So I literally crawled out of the cellar. I went to the nearest toilet, and I was sick there several times. Not all in one go. I essentially was sick, then the pain just got worse and worse. I felt it slightly better in the cellar, so I went back down into the cellar. I was just trying to keep my head, somehow under as much material as I possibly can. It was not getting better, which means to me either they placed some emitters downstairs in the cellar as well. You literally have to scan the entire thing, because it's so easy for them to just come in, plaster it in behind brick, and then you think you're safe, and actually you're not. So I didn't have the capacity to actually make any measurements. But essentially, you're down there in the cellar, like I was, and after a while, again, I had to crawl up, be sick again, go down, try to just, do something, and in the end, I just couldn't. So after I think I was sick 4 times in a row or something like that, and before the last time, I also collapsed on the floor in the bathroom. So this is extreme torture. This is not something I have ever experienced in my life, and this was also not brought about by an infection, because in the end I felt, I can't take this, I have to flee the house. So I literally just took the car and I drove away, and then it takes about something like half an hour for this to die down, because I did have intense beam harassment, not quite this severe, but intense interference with my brain, where I had to just flee my home here in Switzerland, and it takes about 30 minutes before you feel normal, and that's exactly what happened. I felt a lot better as soon as I left the house, but in the end I had to just be somewhere else. And in the end I did go into a building, and as soon as I entered that building, I was fine. It was literally like the beam was switched off again. So this was my very first day back in Germany, and the torture went from there. I was tortured, I was mutilated and maimed every single night in my parental home. My home was under a roof. You saw it in the videos. It was insane. In the end, I had to use baking trays and just try to block out the direct beams. But I do have reason to believe that they have several beam lines and that they shot through the roof. So this is one thing. And just because even when I put essentially metal on behind my head, certain body parts would be painfully microwaved in a very small area. So I think these are very high intensity beams, again roughly the size of a euro coin. So okay, these are just the symptoms essentially of what I felt. And I was also, when I left the house, every single time I left the house, I was painfully microwaved. Essentially, I think they have these emitters inside bags. My family and I, we went to an art exhibition, an art gallery. There I was stalked demonstratively, and it was when those people who were stalking me were in my vicinity that I felt very, very unwell. And again, the building, the gallery was, and the exhibition was partially in the basement, so just directed beams do not really fly. So it either is essentially emitters from these people who are carrying them and essentially are, irradiating me clandestinely from handbags and stuff like that. Or else, and this is another avenue that a lot of the other victims have explored and think that it's due to it, and that is essentially because of brain implants, because of nanotechnology that's inside your brain, that then also reacts to certain signals sent over the mobile phone network. Either way, I have been extremely maimed, tortured, and assaulted in Germany, so that most of the time I was in so much pain I couldn't hold a thought. And by now I feel just constant brain interference. According to Dr. Robert Duncan and Brian Tew, you get hooked up to some supercomputer that then essentially interacts with you non-stop, and you have these signals being just sent to your brain, and it's used to disrupt you. Well, that can very well be the case, because by now I have this continuous load on my brain. And not just that, in Germany I also received intense electromagnetic shocks to the head. Intense. And this means that when I was not thinking about what to do and how to protect myself, I just wanted to be with my family, it was essentially unbearable. So the supercomputer now forced me to think about how I'm going to try to fight this, and how I'm going to go to the police, and what on earth to do for a court case, non-stop. And every single time I forced myself to think about something else, to interact with my family, I was electroshocked, or I was somehow, my brain was loaded with electromagnetic radiation, or through these implants or nanotech, or however they do it, to such a degree that I couldn't focus. So it's essentially, it's, as I said, it is neurological Zersetzung, Zersetzung meaning disintegration in German, but it is essentially brain interference, brain destruction, brain disintegration that is being done to innocent men and women in Germany, mostly women. So this is a war crime. I'm not a national security threat. I've never been an agent. I don't work on anything sensitive. I've never worked on anything sensitive. This is not national security. It's essentially degenerate clinical psychopaths in the military intelligence complex living out their degeneracy. Essentially, this is what it is. To first order, because it goes with incredible sexual humiliation. You yourself can read the sort of comments I get on YouTube and on Twitter, and you yourself can also look at the profile of these accounts. A lot of them are very recent, very few followers, very few other indications of who these people are. But typically they have got symbolism that's related to the intelligence agencies and this cartel, and they are very sexually demeaning. And as you also probably saw, a lot of them made references to concentration camps. There were several profiles with Arbeit macht frei, which is what was written about the concentration camps in Germany. And so you can see for yourself that these are extremely sick people. And these accounts are not victim accounts, so do not confuse it. The victims have a very, very specific and completely different signature. They are people of high integrity who desperately try. But now over Christmas, you could see yourself what was being done to me digitally, online, the comments on YouTube, the comments on Twitter, and you can see the psychopathology for yourself. And these accounts are generated by the intelligence agencies. These are agents or enablers, minions, operatives, whatever you would like to call them. So essentially, my harassment over Christmas was debilitating. I certainly couldn't enjoy it for 1 second. It was non-stop torture. At night, I was brutally microwaved to the point that I felt damaged every morning. It was also what happened a lot in Germany is that when I went to bed, I started feeling very unwell. My head was being irradiated, and then I started feeling popping sounds inside my head. And that's essentially the telltale sign for cavitation, I would say. It's essentially high-intensity microwave pulses being shot into my brain, causing essentially little bubble formation as the water cooks and evaporates in small regions of my brain. And when this happens, when the bubbles collapse or when the bubbles burst, you have cavitation, and that's the shock wave from this little bubble popping, traveling through the tissue. And cavitation is hugely damaging. So essentially what this is neurosurgery in a sense. It is mutilation of my brain, and there has been systematic mutilation. And these popping sounds are essentially the shock wave from a little superheated bubble bursting, and then sending the shock wave that damages the tissue. And essentially when it hits my skull, that's when through the bone structure I can hear it, essentially. And it was very interesting because the shock wave travels just like sound at different, no, it travels at the same speed, but it has different times depending on where the bubble bursts inside my brain. There's different time of travel to either ear. So through that, this is how your brain also reconstructs 3D sound by just, time taken. If you essentially have two sensors, and from where the sound hits your ear first relative to the other, your brain reconstructs where in the room the sound is coming from. So this is normal, and your brain will do exactly the same thing when the sound is inside your head. And this is why I could tell that it was essentially, I could map out where the cavitation, which I think, is cavitation, has happened inside my head as these microwave pulses were punched into my head. So imagine every single night in Germany, my brain was damaged. They did essentially brain surgery. I don't really want to call it surgery because that would imply that there's some sort of system or some sort of like health benefit. There's none. But I think it could be as precise as surgery because if Brian Q and Dr. Robert Duncan are right, then they do map out your brain functionality, and essentially they can map out certain regions of activity. Certain thoughts will trigger certain regions, and if they disagree with the thoughts or with what you do when you think those thoughts, then they can literally burn out the area of your brain. They can literally make your brain cells pop with these microwave weapons, and they can make your brain cells pop inside your own home because these microwaves pass through concrete, right? Concrete doesn't get damaged through microwaves. I've heard reports that actually, it can be. But your organic tissue certainly does get damaged. So essentially I have been maimed and mutilated on direct orders of the BND because they are the ones, and the Verfassungsschutz, they both hang together. But it is the Verfassungsschutz and the BND who knows what flight I'm on, who knows where I live, who would have had the personnel at the airport to then immediately in lockstep after I've been irradiated on the airplane, to continue irradiating me from the airport, which is a security controlled zone, all the way home. So this is on direct orders of the intelligence agencies. So everything I say under oath is crimes committed, premeditated crimes, mutilation and torture, on par with what has happened to the Jews in the concentration camps. This is war crimes and crimes against humanity, and the only people who can possibly be responsible for these are the intelligence agencies. It's the heads of the intelligence agencies who are responsible. There's no other entity in our countries that has this access to military technology, has the surveillance network, has got access to the databases, and this is after having asked them to cease and desist in May last year. So the BND has been addressed by me personally, and what you also saw was my public request. Now it's a public request to cease and desist, which I have sent to the BND, and the attacks continued. So essentially the head of the BND, Dr. Bruno Karl, has ignored my public request to cease and desist. The attacks have continued, and I would like to publicly confirm this. So essentially this Nazi brain mapping experiment that is being conducted in Germany and Switzerland and the UK for sure, and has been conducted on me, continues, and these men refuse to stop it. They refuse to stop it. And I do make this allegation quite, freely and openly in public, simply because the head of the BND certainly has the power, absolutely has the power, has the investigatory power, has the manpower, has the finances, and has the access to military technology and the defense measures and the measuring equipment. And when the attacks continue, it means that the head of the BND chose not to use those means. And that's because he would have to use those means against his own network. But when he doesn't, so he doesn't use his means to have this investigated, and he doesn't ask his network to stop. This means that he actively wishes to continue the crimes against humanity. That's what it means. So essentially, this is now my victim report. I don't want to make the video any longer, but the bottom line is I have been viciously tortured, microwaved. I received brain damage in my parental home in a systematic fashion every night. I was also woken up by muscle pulses. I have been kept awake until 4 a.m. in the morning by torture, by premeditated torture with microwave weapon technology. And I want this recorded. And I ask you, please, if you watch this far in your video, please make a backup copy wherever you are in the world. Download it, please burn it onto CD, and please know that these crimes are real. I'm a real victim. I am fighting for my life, and I am being systematically mutilated publicly. This is a public execution that you're watching. And we have, we as Western civilization have abolished public executions, but the intelligence agencies have brought them back, essentially. And this is what you're watching now. It's a public execution. If you disagree with public executions, please help me. You can help me by retweeting the link, by informing your family, your friends, your colleagues that these things are happening. You can help me an awful lot if you repost my videos on your channel or in an anonymous channel. I want these videos to be spread. Everything I say, I want to be preserved for posterity. I do mean every word I say, and I do have evidence for what I'm saying. I also uploaded the measurements to my skull, the beams to my skull, and I think from the videos you can see that there was a continuous beam to one side of my skull and another beam where you could hear a beeping beat pattern. When you can hear the beeping, it means that it's in the hertz range. So hertz means beats per second. So when it goes, essentially you hear a beep every second, that is 1 hertz. If you hear 2 beeps per second, it's 2 hertz. If you hear 1 beep every 2 seconds, it's half a hertz. Okay, and this is what essentially this uploaded video means. But anyway, this is all the things that happened in Germany. I have been assaulted in public. I have been assaulted at my parental home continuously. I've been tortured. I have sent a public request to cease and desist, which has been ignored by Dr. Bruno Karl. And this was addressed to him personally. And I shall make future videos and address them to him personally. Specific requests to cease and desist. Thank you for listening, and please make a backup copy. This is the update. I'm Dr. Katherine Horton. Thank you very much for your time.